Welcome to Cool Life Podcast, brought to you by therealthingdating.com. www.therealthingdating.com.
Polydor Records for out scouting. This girl grabbed my bangs and ran my head right into the speaker.
Oh,
And everyone heard like this, yeah.
When we shot the scene in Good Will Hunting, I didn't know who most of these people were at the time. I mean, they weren't stars. It was Gus Van Sant that directed it. Gus Van Sant was on the floor with Matt Damon's character. I didn't even know who Matt Damon was at that time.
I'm Eva John. I'm a former candidate for local government. I was a children's television entertainer, and I love this world, and I believe we should take care of each other and have a lot of fun along the way. Welcome to Cool Life. Here we go. And welcome to Cool Life Podcast. I'm Eva John, and today we're with our special guest, Dennis Kowalski. He's the president of the CRYONICS Institute in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dennis.
Thanks for having me, Eva.
I'm so glad that you're here to join us. And the subject of cryonics, for those who have heard about it and seen talk of it and sci-fi movies and so on, and here's a chance to really know what the facts are. So in a nutshell, Dennis, can you say what exactly is cryonics?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about cryonics. But in a nutshell, I'll try to give you the short version. Cryonics is the process or scientific venture of attempting to preserve life by taking people in this time frame, transporting them to a future hospital that may or may not exist. So you say, well, how are you going to do that? Well, once people are legally dead, and I'll get into that, then we can start to freeze them down to ice temperatures. And then from ice temperatures, we make sure we do CPS, cardiopulmonary support. We inject some medications, and we ship them as fast as possible to the CRYONICS Institute in Michigan. At that point, we cool them further down to dry ice temperatures, and we infuse the body with a cryoprotectant. It's like a biological antifreeze that we had developed for us. Similar, I guess, to reverse engineering what some animals and insects use to preserve their own tissues with freezing temperatures. And then we take them down to liquid nitrogen temperatures, and we put them in the containers for the long store in hopes that the future technology will someday exist to bring these people back. And so there's a lot of unpacking to do with that, and a lot of assumptions, of course, but we think that time is on our side, and history kind of, has validated us since our existence. A lot of things that we said were going to happen have happened, and it's leading to a future where this may be very viable and very possible to bring people back.
Wow. It is quite a science and technology, and to know that we are participating in that here and now. And can you tell me, when someone makes a decision that they want to participate in this for their future, what are they looking at for, like, the price ballpark? What is that investment for preserving themselves with cryonics?
Sure. So CRYONICS is a nonprofit organization, and not all nonprofits are the same. Some nonprofits pay themselves fancy administrative costs. In our case, all of our records are open for public scrutiny. You can see where every single penny is spent. And our organization is mostly volunteers, kind of a skeleton staff to just do what we need to have done. And most of the money that goes into CRYONICS, it currently costs $28,000. Most of that money goes into an endowment fund invested in S&P 500 index type funds. And that's what pays for the perpetual overhead. The interest on that compounding pays for the taxes, utilities, liquid nitrogen, salaries of the workers, the buildings and supplies. So a very small amount of it goes to the actual initial freezing process, and then most of it goes for the storage. And we have to do this perpetually. So we have to have enough money in a principal investment so that the endowment will pay for people going forward. We've been doing this for over 45 years with no hiccups whatsoever. No power outages, no financial hiccups, and we intend to do this for hundreds of years if need be, or however long it takes.
Amazing.
28,000 might seem like a lot. In 1976, when we started, that was our price. So adjusted for inflation, we've gone down. Whereas a funeral used to be $600. Now that's up to around 12,000 average US.
You're right.
And people also use common life insurance policies to fund this. So
Okay.
anyone can do this.
Amazing. I do know that, globally, worldwide, there are other organizations, and they might have a starting fee around 10 times almost what you are charging. And so that's, a lot, as you were saying, that sometimes those funds are being used for increased salaries of people rather than being put back into the business. It's amazing that you have a pared down, efficient use of the funds to make it a much more workable, accessible fee. That's awesome.
Right. You might ask yourself, how many things are going down in price lately?
Right.
Not too many. So we must be doing something right.
Oh,
And we get internally and externally audited. Anyone can look at those records and see right exactly what's going on. And we seem to be doing something right. Now, in a little bit of defense of other organizations, some just ask for more in anticipation that they'll need more. They run with a larger staff, higher paid staff. And also, we can talk about standby, which is the process of getting a person from wherever they're at to the CRYONICS Institute.
right.
And there could be fees involved with that, such as air ambulance or shipping and funeral service, medical services, and so forth. And again, it depends on where you're at in the world. It depends on all kinds of logistics and who's involved in the standby suspension as well.
So does the CRYONICS Institute take care of that, the fees, the cost involved from where somebody is when they're declared having passed to the point where they are brought to storage, and that little gap in between? Is that what the fee covers, or is that something in addition to the storage services that has to be paid out by a client?
Typically, the client is responsible for point A to point B getting to us. And the reason being is, you could be a half hour outside of the CRYONICS Institute, or you could be on the other side of the world. And and then for us to try to deal with all of the bureaucratic entities, airlines, different legal entities, and so forth, we kind of set up a guide for people, and we work closely with other organizations all over the world. So, like we have CRYONICS UK, there's an organization called ICE, International CRYONICS. We work with International Funeral Services,
Right.
all kinds of different people all across the world. And so we've kind of worked out prices, but it's still, kind of a la carte, up to the individual how much they want to put into it. Some people plan when they get older to move to the CRYONICS Institute to be closer, which does make things a lot safer for them. But I would say it very much parallels traditional emergency medicine. So if you're going to live close to a big city, you're going to have more resources
Right.
than if you live out in the countryside where you're going to be away from hospitals and so forth. It's a very similar situation.
That's good to know that there's a certain amount of planning, and then I guess creating a budget, knowing that the transport from, as you said, the point A to point B part being the client's responsibility. And that covers a really big question for a lot of people, just saying, what are the steps and the tools needed to really realistically participate. And now, what do you think that would cost a person ballpark? Let's just say that they're on vacation. And so that means they're arranging, let's say, flying up from being in the Caribbean or in Mexico or something, if they've passed there. And if they're on vacation and they pass and they make arrangements, they really literally have to arrange for themselves to be transported back to the United States, back to the Cryonics Institute.
Yeah, so that opens a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I mean, there's
Right.
no guarantees in chronics. Well, I guess I could answer the simpler question of my own situation. I live 7 hours outside of the chronics facility that I intend to be suspended at. So I've allotted an extra $10,000, and with all the equipment and all the planning I've done, it'll probably cost around $5,000 currently.
Right.
But I've allotted an extra 10,000 to 10 to 20, but that's what I'm kind of anticipating.
Right.
Now it all depends. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, there might be no amount of money that is going to get you from point A to point B within a viable situation. And we don't make any false promises as far as that goes. It comes down to if you would go into a cardiac arrest situation and you are alone in the woods or something like that, going on a hike, it's very likely even the best doctors in the world, an hour outside aren't going to do you any good. Whereas if you're watching the baseball game with your neighbor, who happens to be a plumber and not even a doctor, but he knows a little something about CPR, he could save your life from a logistics standpoint by doing CPR. So it really depends, and that's traditional, conventional medicine.
Right.
So we're pretty much the same thing, just add ice,
Right.
and a few more logistical hurdles to overcome. But I think with enough planning and enough redundancy, you can mitigate a lot of these things. Like, for instance, we do have alerts on our phone, our cell phone alerts,
Yeah.
that check on you, see how you're doing. And if you don't answer that alert, that it might send a text message out with your GPS location saying, hey, I might need some help, and your neighbor will come check on you, or someone will check on you. And I think that's a great product to have, whether you're in chronics or not, just for elderly people or people with any kind of medical conditions.
Right, right. For sure, the technology is there to offer more support, and the more we link into that, gives us better opportunities. Now, I wonder, for something that, there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of decisions that are made in advance for, a future benefit. At this point in history, has there ever been any human revival through the techniques of cryonics?
Yes and no. So the short answer is, we've got embryos, sperm and eggs, that have been frozen down to liquid nitrogen temperatures and have been grown into viable human beings and live adults right now talking with us. And there's nothing spooky about it. But when I was a child, they called those test tube babies, and it was a big giant ordeal. And now it's pretty much accepted and taken for granted that we call it in vitro fertilization. But I think what you're really asking, the larger question, has a adult mammal or been frozen down to liquid nitrogen temperatures and brought back? And currently, no. And so it's a difficult, my answer is this, is we haven't cured cancer yet, but should we do cancer research? Absolutely. So we're kind of in the process of doing the research and seeing what is possible in the future. That's the whole point of chronics. If we could bring back a pet now, we'd kind of be in the future. We'd have molecular nanotechnology, maybe genetic tissue, stem cell reengineering, advanced AI to help guide us. All these things would exist, but they don't exist yet. We feel that they will exist. We're just at the cusp of a lot of that stuff. So the Cryonics Institute is in the ambulance ride to get you to that future. We're not that future. We're not the hospital yet. So that's the whole point of cryonics, because I think if we had all those things, you wouldn't need cryonics to get you there. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's like saying if we had the cure to cancer, we wouldn't need the research and all the develop R&D that goes into trying to cure cancer. So we're not a complete project. We're a project in works.
Okay.
We're the experimental phase, and everyone else who's buried and cremated is the control group, if you will.
Okay, right. Well, it's simply fascinating that this is a future that the idea of cryonics and the Cryonics Institute is helping to build the roadway towards that. Now we're going to take a little break. We'll be speaking more about cryonics and the Cryonics Institute with Dennis Kowalski here on the Cool Life Podcast.
Thanks.
Those lonely days of lockdowns and isolation are gone for good. Go to www.therealthingdating.com. That's www.therealthingdating.com. It's time to share. Share your time, share your life, share your love. www.therealthingdating.com. Join for free. Upgrade at any time, starting at just $5.99 a month. www.therealthingdating.com. Because it's time. This is Cool Life Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to Cool Life on your streaming service and on YouTube as Hellenique Today. That's HELENIQUE Today. Because that helps us to bring more cool stuff to your ears. You're listening to the Cool Life Podcast. We'll be right back. And we are back at Cool Life Podcast. And today we're having an ongoing conversation with Mr. Dennis Kowalski, president of the Cryonics Institute in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And before the break, we were talking about the hopefulness of full body revival of a frozen, cryonically prepared human. And in this case, for like the future hopes, like what is that process that's happening to the body that, ordinarily if someone gets cold, they get frostbite, you get damaged tissue. So what's happening what's the difference between what a person's body is going through cryonics from if they just got caught up north and couldn't get to their shelter in time? Like how are you saving their body from frostbite?
Sure. That's a tough question. There's three very large hurdles that we need to cross or go over. And one is how are we going to reverse any ice damage to the tissues? How are we going to reverse any aging that's already taking place? And the diseases and trauma that actually push the person into a state where they were declared dead. Big things to reverse that are impossible to reverse today, but likely to be reversed in the future, and I'll go into each one. First of all, with the ice damage, we mitigate a lot of that with the vitrification process. We use a formula called CIVM1, Cryonics Institute Vitrification Mixture 1, developed by a cryobiologist, Yuri Perchugin, years ago for us. And it's kind of like I said, a reverse engineering of the proteins and substances that are used by living animals that freeze solid, like the North American wood frog, for instance, some insects and some smaller creatures. So we're already using these things to, for instance, store sperm and eggs and embryos and skin tissues and so forth. It's not a perfect process, especially when you're talking about larger organisms and larger samples of tissues. But we are mitigating a lot of the damage. It's envisioned that other technologies in the future, such as molecular nanotechnology, maybe some stem cell tissue engineering, 3D biological printers. We'll be able to put a lot of things back together again that were damaged. You remember that DNA itself, that's a very tough substance. It can survive even without the liquid nitrogen process. If even one cell out of trillions survives the process, we have the DNA blueprint and roadmap to fix, replace, and repair every component of a person. So that's part of the process. The other part is, okay, well, that would just be a clone of me, right? We want the whole you, your essence of your mind, soul, body, whatever, to be brought back. So we look at the synapses and connectome connections of your brain. How are we going to preserve them with enough fidelity so your mind is intact? And what if some of those things are broken? Well, then we look at it like a puzzle. If a puzzle's broken, we can still, it's not viable, but we can still take that information and we can reconstruct it. And that's kind of what your body does when it heals itself internally with stem cells now. Now just ramp that up by about 10,000, and you should be able to fix and repair the freezing damage and whatever caused trauma and disease, and even reverse aging itself. Because we can take your skin cells right now and trick those back into pluripotent stem cells right now. We just don't do it because we haven't perfected that process either. But imagine where that's heading and where that's taking us. So in essence, Mother Nature has already done these things. They've reversed ice damage, aging, and even death. If you think about it, every time a man and a woman procreate and start the brand new cells start over in a new baby, that's a resetting of the clock, resetting of the age, and restarting the process. So it would be like another. I love to use analogies. So imagine, we're having a discussion with Da Vinci about heavier than air flight. And one person says, oh, it's impossible. We'll never have heavier than air flight. And the other person says, but look above and a bird flies by. So, Mother Nature's got birds flying all over the place. And these heavier than air creatures exist. But it still took hundreds of years because it was a technical, the challenge of we didn't have a combustion engine. We didn't have, light aluminum aircraft products that the Wright brothers put together in their bicycle shops to make a heavier than air flight possible. But it did happen because there was proof in nature that it existed. It wasn't impossible. It just was a hard nut to crack. It was just a difficult problem. And that's the beauty of cryonics. You have all the time in the world to solve these issues.
And it's very, very interesting. I mean, knowing that, okay, there is a plan to help to reconstitute the body. And I mean, I kind of want to put a pin in that where you're saying, okay, we have the technology now to reconstitute skin cells that have aged. And it's like, should there be a side industry with cryonics as far as like, these options, something as an option to plastic surgery, or I'm sure you'd have a lineup for going right down the street for people who are ready to have their skin reconstituted. Sure. We have the technology now. I guess it's just a matter of, does it have, FDA and Health Canada approval or
so there's a lot of people to what you're saying. There's a lot of people out there that are saving their embryonic cells from the umbilical cord, for instance, because they don't know what will be possible with those cells in the future. Maybe they'll be able to grow them into a new liver or kidney or heart if you need a transplant, and it won't be someone else's liver kidney. It'll be your tissues, brand new tissues, perfect.
I think I saw that movie. Okay, where, they actually didn't tell anybody they had your tissues, but they had let your tissues grow to be viable human beings who were
right. Well, I'm not talking about harvesting from a human being. I'm talking about just growing the liver by itself or the heart by itself. Right. And even today, some people have frozen their pets with us, and they've taken some of that DNA from those pets and they've cloned those pets with an organization in South Korea. And there is, pet dogs and cats are out there from the tissues of the frozen pets that,
Right.
are stored with us.
I have heard about that. I've heard that Barbara Streisand, I don't think she doesn't hide it, that she did have her pet dog cloned, and so that she's enjoying another option of having a loving relationship with a dog that she already knew.
Mhm.
So it's there right now. It's happening now. It's just no, it's not legal to do that with human beings.
Not yet, but it will maybe be in the future. I think the reason is that it's not legal, and a lot of people really don't explore that. But part of it's because the process is not perfected yet, and so in order to clone a pet, you might go through 30 or 40 embryos that you have to destroy because they're not viable.
Okay.
And so with humans, we're not ready to do that. But maybe once they perfect it to the point that you don't have to destroy any of these embryos, you could go straight from the clone to the human. Maybe then it'll be more acceptable. I'm not sure. I don't want to get into all the ethics of it, but I'm just saying that things are changing and they're moving along. I think for the positive. I'm, like I said, eternally optimistic about all this stuff.
Right.
But so many things that were impossible, like, you think of the device that would allow you to access all the knowledge of mankind and talk to someone on the other face of the earth. They used to call that a crystal ball, and today it's called a cell phone with Google. And we take it for granted that what was completely impossible 20 years ago is routine today.
That's the truth. Tell me, what happens when you're preparing for this process? If at the time that a person is, declared as no longer alive, no longer in a viable body, what if there's an issue of, trauma or an unnatural passing? There may be investigations and things that would delay, quick lowering of the temperature of the body. Is there a plan in place to help a client in those situations?
There's always plans to mitigate those things, but we like to tell our clients that nothing is guaranteed. This whole process, we're brutally honest that it might not work at all. We're putting all of our efforts and time for 40 plus years into something that might not work. We like to say, though, you're no worse off than anyone who's buried or cremated, but you'll never know unless you try. The only guarantee is if you don't try, you'll never know. We think it is worth, even if it's a small percentage. I think it's more than 50%. Some people think it's as low as 1%. But either way, I think that, if the percentage is better than zero, to me, there's nothing more important than life, especially your loved ones and your family and friends. I'd give everything that I own to bring back some of my relative, my father, for instance, everything I would give. But and I think most people think that way. At least if they had good relationships with their parents. And we it's fighting the good fight. It's worth it to try. And so that's what we're doing. But the question is, like, what could go wrong? A million things could go wrong. A tornado could hit our organization.
Good. I mean, that's a big question. If there is a tornado, like, is there like an emergency service plan? Like, is there like a special like basement or like a shelter or, for
it's just not practical. I mean, it's not practical at this point to, we don't have a underground NORAD facility for our cryo patients. We just don't have the money and resources. But again, we've operated for 45 plus years with no incidents. So I think it's worth it to try for another couple hundred years. Certainly, I've thrown myself in the hat, and my family and my children are all signed up. We think it's worth it. But yeah, can things go wrong? Autopsy, for sure. We've actually reached out to medical examiners and minimized the autopsy. If there wasn't a need to dissect the patient's brain, maybe do a less invasive autopsy with a quick scan and keep the patient on ice, in between autopsies, and hurry up and put us at the front of the line. Usually, a lot of medical examiners, once we get the family involved, and they're they want to help the family. They know they're going through a grieving time, but they have a job to do as well. Collecting evidence for a case or not, or whatever, making sure there's no crime and a death. So we've thought of over 45 years and thousands of people signed up. We've kind of ran these scenarios of what if and what could go wrong. And some things are too expensive to even address, and other things, well, we can address them to the best of our abilities, and we build in levels of redundancy. We have 2 or 3 or 4 backup plans to everything, so that we can at least minimize the chances that something goes wrong and optimize the chances that everything goes right.
Amazing. Well, it's absolutely fascinating. We have more questions for you, and we're going to take a little break right now to talk about our sponsors and supporters, and we'll be back on Cool Life Podcast. Those lonely days of lockdowns and isolation are gone for good. Go to www.therealthingdating.com. That's www.therealthingdating.com. It's time to share. Share your time, share your life, share your love. www.therealthingdating.com. Join for free. Upgrade at any time, starting at just $5.99 a month. www.therealthingdating.com. Because it's time. You're listening to the Cool Life Podcast. We'll be back in 3, 2, 1. We are back here at Cool Life Podcast and our continuing conversation with Dennis Kowalski, president of the CRYONICS Institute in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Dennis, a really big question that we're talking about arrangements that are made of cryonics, a very extreme cold storage of the human body for future revival, but you have access to the body for this preparation after the person is declared dead. Now, so what are we looking at? You're bringing back the dead?
So again, excellent question. Are we bringing back the dead? It goes into the framework and reference and definition of the word death. I often say the death is not an event; it's an actual process. A whole bunch of things happen in the human body. I used to work as a paramedic for the city of Milwaukee for a long time. And so I dealt with a lot of cardiac arrest codes. And people don't just instantly die and dissolve away. They call 911. Sometimes their hearts stop, and we can come in there with our equipment. We can do cardiac defibrillation. We can do CPR. And we routinely bring people back to life. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Again, it depends on so many different variables and different factors. But 100 years ago, there was no such system. And so if your heart stopped, you were declared dead, rightfully so, because nobody did begin CPR or use cardiac defibrillators. But today, we use those devices to restart the heart. So I would argue with conventional emergency medicine, are we bringing back the dead? And some people say it's a matter of semantics. Well, it's the same thing with cryonics. If cryonics doesn't work, then I guess you're dead for good. But if it does work, that they bring people back in the future, it's just like an extremely long cardiac arrest code that was delayed through the cold process. Right. And in fact, we're even finding today through trauma and certain medical conditions like a heart attack and stroke, the conventional medical system is using therapeutic hypothermia to cool people down, not as cold as we do, but that also buys them extra time. And so that it might turn minutes into hours for them for critical surgeries.
Well, I've heard of that. I've heard I know for sure, University of Maryland, that medical team there did they slow the metabolism of the patient by exsanguination. They removed all the blood and replaced it with saline, which is basically salt water, and had the person, the patient, in a slowed metabolic state, like a coma, and did the surgery, which they wouldn't have survived in just a normal state of unconsciousness because of the physical trauma, and then resanguinated, put back their blood and fluids, and revived that person. So is that proof that cryonics works?
I think it's definitely breadcrumbs that are leading logical-minded people to the path and conclusion that what we're doing is certainly a good thing and certainly worth. This is a question that's worth asking, and that's what we're doing with our experiment, if you will. To another point, to even drive the point home a little deeper, when I said when your heart stops, we bring you back. In conventional medicine, are we bringing back the dead? There is a type of a brain surgery where they drain the blood out of the patient's brain, and so that brain does not show any brain activity, no electrical activity in the brain whatsoever. So not only are you cardiac dead, you're brain dead, and then they can do that surgery after so many hours. There's a time limit and a window, but they bring those patients back, and people don't ask, are they zombies or clones or anything like that, or did they bring back the dead? It's just another medical procedure. But boy, that's really begs the question, what is death? What does it really mean? And if you can bring these people up, if you can wake them out of surgery,
Right.
then apparently they weren't dead. So if you're able to bring cryonics patients back 200 years from now, even if they were deeply unconscious with no heartbeat and no brainwaves for 200 years, were they dead? And I think not. I think we've already have the example today, because of those surgeries, that they're not dead, and we're not bringing back the dead.
Wow. It is incredible to know that, little by little we are getting closer. I mean, knowing that type of description of the surgery and the activity of the brain that is able to come back after being in a state where it's not active at all. Now, in cryonics, I've got to say, in the public zeitgeist, there's a certain understanding, maybe some assumptions. We've all seen the movie Vanilla Sky, starring Tom Cruise and some other amazing actors. And, in that whole premise, the whole idea, it brings to mind what mental state, what type of brain activity is possible while you're in a state of the cryostasis. Is there brain activity going on?
I mean, the brain is such a complex organ. We don't really know a lot of things about it for sure, but I think it's pretty safe to say, because there is no electrical activity, there is no thought process going on. I mean, Vanilla Sky was a great movie. Demolition Man, some of these other movies where they depicted the person thinking while they're in cryogenic state, and that may be the case, but I don't believe, to me, that doesn't make sense logically, that they have the ability to think. Now, in Vanilla Sky, you could argue you really didn't show what's going on outside of the main character's mind. You were kind of along for the ride inside of his mind. So outside, maybe they did wake him up and kept him in a semi state of consciousness for the whole movie to play out in his mind in this virtual world, if you will. I don't know, but I do think there's sufficient evidence that you have to have some electrical activity, some electrical biochemical activity in your brain for thoughts to exist. I mean, even when you go into a deep surgery, you're not even in a dream state when the surgery is deep enough, and that's at warm temperatures with some biomedical or biological activity taking place. So I really don't, personally, I don't believe so.
It's good to get the answer. I mean, it's not a subject that we take in school, right? So,
Right.
saying, okay, well, some biology classes, they'll dissect frogs, and some biology classes, they'll tell you, you got to figure out where on the body, where's our liver, and where's the kidney, where's the heart, and to pass the test. But do we understand brain activity when you're, post-mortem or after declared death? So the answer is there isn't brain activity. So those scenarios, those
The logic follows that if there's no biological activity or electrical activity, there's no thoughts. However, it does seem that long-term memories and long-term thoughts are stored in the physical structure of the brain.
right.
And so if we can save the viability of that structure by preserving it in a cryogenic stasis, then we're saving the mind. And that's what we believe. That's the $1 million question that we're asking ourselves.
Dennis, I've done some, light reading on the subject. So is it a fact that the bodies, when they're in storage, are stored in an upside down, like in an inverted state? And if that's the way the storage is done, can you tell me the reason for that type of?
Sure. So often people will ask us, what if the power goes out or something of that nature? And we don't use power. I mean, we have backup generators and all that stuff. We use cryostats or DWARs that are basically large thermos bottles with a vacuum in between to serve as insulation. So there's an outer tube with an inner tube, just like a thermos bottle, and the people are placed inside with liquid nitrogen, right? And the reason they're placed upside down is, let's say we did have some kind of catastrophic leak, which, by the way, we haven't had in 45 years.
Okay.
But if we did have a leak or some a fast boil off of the liquid nitrogen, the thing that we want to preserve more than anything would be your brain, which is the seat of your intelligence. So if we did lose anything or there was damage, we'd rather have your toes damaged than your brain. And that's the reason we store people upside down. So typically at the Cryonics Institute, the way we do things is we measure those physically every single day. We measure where the liquid nitrogen levels are. And every week we top them off. We just put a little bit more in because as it evaporates down, because of that good insulation, it would take probably 6 months for all that liquid nitrogen to boil out of the tank and completely be room temperature. But we're not going to wait that long. We're just going to let the boil off every week, and we just keep topping it off, topping it off, topping it off. But we measure it every day just to make sure that there's no leaks or any pinholes in the cryostats or anything like that. We also test them vigorously before we even put people in them. So, and once they pass all of our testing, then we go ahead and store the patients in the tanks.
So what is the actual official name of these tanks of tubes? We've seen them and I'll give us a look at this, but what is the name of the actual container?
So there's two types we use, two containers we use. There's a silver stainless steel tank we use. We call that a DEWAR, DEWAR, and that has a vacuum in between the two containers. And then the other one is called a cryostat. It's like a fiberglass resin. They're large white containers. They have the same vacuum in between, but they also have an extra layer of insulation as well. The silver ones have a permanent vacuum, and the white ones have a vacuum valve that we have to vacuum out about every month or so.
So then I guess, is there a different price point between one or the other, or?
Oh, I think the white fiberglass ones are a little better built, but I think a little bit more maintenance and initial preparation goes into those tanks. So it's just a matter of, we try to use both because of redundancy, in case one supplier wouldn't be able to supply us, or prices go up for the resins, or prices go up for the stainless steel. So we have like 3 suppliers of each type of container, and it's just economies of scale and redundancy for the protection of our patients.
That's really fascinating to know. I mean, that there's quite a bit of thought, design, and technology that's there to support clients who have made this decision to go into cryostasis. Now, for a person, given it some thought, done the research, and they're ready to enroll, what's involved in enrolling? Is it that you have to announce this to family? Do you have to announce it to a lawyer? How do you enroll?
Well, I think the most important thing is people start off and they educate themselves. They come to our website. It's www.cryonics.org, and there's a lot of reading material. Again, 45 years we've been working on that, and we try to answer all those questions. But typically, what a person will do is once they've convinced themselves that this is for them, they'll sign up, and they'll usually get a life insurance policy if they're a young person. If they're older, they should have the assets saved up if they've been planning properly throughout their life. And
And
then,
not partying and not being
right,
not
right,
living like a rock star or a gypsy
frivolous, right?
like
So,
the rest of us.
so they hopefully they have the assets. And then what they do is sign up with a membership at the CRYONICS Institute. Currently, our membership is $120 per year, or if you don't want to pay a yearly bill, a recurring bill, it's $1,200 one time for a lifetime membership, and then you don't have to pay any more annual billing, and then you're a member, and that affords you the ability to sign up, and then we send you all the documents. There's all different types of documents. There's a suspension contract. There's riders like what would happen if your body is lost at sea or burned up in a fire. Do you want that money in your insurance policy to go back to your family or to some charitable organization, or do you still want it to come to us? And so people say, well, why would you want it to come to us if you didn't actually freeze us? And it's funny. That's how I had it set up when I first joined, because I didn't, understand how things work. I was a little naive. It turns out that if you do that, if you have it going back to the family, that might be a financial incentive for the family to just bury you so they can get the money. And sadly, that's actually happened.
Oh.
So, I'm leaving in my own personal situation. I'm leaving the bulk of my estate to my family. 95% of my money is going to my family.
Right.
And but there's stipulations in there that they won't mess around with the 35,000, 40,000 that I've set ahead for the CRYONICS Institute, and they're going to leave that alone. And if they do try to go after that, then they could be disinherited or get a dollar. So there's a huge financial disincentive.
Right.
And I trust my family, but it's also kind of me setting an example for other members who have been buried or because of this whole money thing, because people do get greedy when it comes to money. So anyways, but it's an option. It's completely up to you what you want. So it's your body. You get to decide what to do with your body. You can, then you should work with your family. You should incentivize getting your wishes carried out and disincentivize people going against you. You should spell everything out. You should talk to people. It shouldn't be a surprise that you're going to get cryopreserved, right? And just like anything else, like a lot of people don't do good at estate planning. They don't have their wills spelled out, and then that causes family fighting and so forth. Ironically, I read something where something like 40% of divorced couples have not changed their life insurance beneficiaries away from the spouse that they might not even be talking to anymore, and then they die, and it doesn't go to their new spouse or their children. It goes to the old spouse, and it's just a huge terrible number. And I think it's because people don't want to address death. They don't want to worry about planning wills. It's just I'm not going to die tomorrow. I'll worry about it later. And then and then it happens. So it's CRYONICS is a big part of kind of taking the bull by its horns and saying, I'm going to address this issue. I don't have to, I don't look forward to being cryopreserved. I don't live my every day thinking about cryonics. It's just a backup life insurance plan that I have for myself and my family. And other than that, I go on to live life and to the best of my ability and as if it's my only life I'll ever have. So I'm under no special illusions that I'm guaranteed a second shot, but I'm still set up to take advantage of the possibility that there might be a second shot.
Amazing. It is an interesting and beautiful concept and a way of bringing everything that was considered to be the future and science fiction into the here and now with enough real planning. And so we are going to take another little break. And what's going to happen here is we're going to come back for a part 2 to continue our conversation with Dennis Kowalski. For part 1, that's it for now. And thank you so much for everyone who joined us and listened to the end here at Cool Life Podcast. I'm Eva John. And that was our show. Thank you for listening to the very end. Please remember to subscribe through your streaming service to get more access to our guest interviews. Also, please subscribe on YouTube to help support our podcast. Until next time, I'm Eva John for Cool Life Podcast. Thank you for turning me on.